I was preparing to teach the module USA 1945 to 75 to my Year 10 GCSE history class. We were focused specifically on the Red Scare, a period of heightened fear of communism and its threat to the United States in the late 1940s and early 1950s. And we were working towards answering the inquiry question: how did the international situation make Americans more fearful of communism? In order to access this topic, I knew my pupils needed to know the international context at the end of World War II. I was aware that they had studied World War II in Year 9, and so checking their prior knowledge of it and reteaching it if necessary would mean they all had the foundational knowledge needed to help them learn the events, people, and concepts on this new topic. I checked this foundational knowledge through a simple assessment task where I asked pupils to list the theatres and combatants in World War II as well as some of the key dates. This showed me almost inevitably that some pupils had remembered more of this knowledge than others. This meant I had to reteach this information by recapping events during the war, firstly in Europe and then in the Far East. I then secured this specific knowledge in pupils' long term memories through a repeated retrieval of the same information in each of that week's lessons. You can see that I actually gave pupils most of the sentences for the questions at the bottom, and they only needed to fill out the date. This is because I wanted them to really focus their thinking on the dates, as these were the key pieces of information I wanted them to retain. The final thing that pupils needed before accessing the new content was to understand the concepts of capitalism and communism and the differences between them, in order to begin to understand why people in the USA may have feared communism. In my experience, pupils tend to arrive in Year 10 with a vague understanding in this area and often carry some misconceptions, such as capitalism being synonymous with democracy. In order to bring every pupil to a similar level of understanding, we read about the two systems and then categorized their economic and political features. Again, you can see that I've highlighted some of the key points in the text to focus pupil thinking towards the key elements of these concepts. I added questions on the key differences to the retrieval quizzes I used for the remainder of the week, again to secure this knowledge in pupils' long term memories. With all of this foundational knowledge now secure, I felt confident that the burden on their working memories would be reduced when we moved on to encounter new knowledge. The new knowledge I wanted pupils to learn was largely dictated by the exam specification. Pupils needed to understand how events outside of the USA in the half decade or so after World War II led to an increased fear of communism inside the USA. However, before explaining how I linked this new knowledge to pupils' prior knowledge, I want to give one very specific example of the precise knowledge that I identified pupils needed. I focused in very specifically on the term Red Scare, as I wanted pupils to have a clear understanding of its meaning. I used a visual image from the period to demonstrate attitudes towards communism in the USA and explain that red was used as a shorthand for communism and communists, before writing a working definition of the term that pupils could refer to throughout this section of content. I finally turned to teaching pupils about the events outside of the USA that drove increased fear of communism. Focusing on the first series of events, the Soviet expansion in Eastern Europe, we returned to what pupils already knew about World War II in Europe. Pupils recalled that Nazi Germany had been invaded from the west by the USA and Britain, and from the east by the Soviet Union. I was able to build on this knowledge to explain that many of the countries in Eastern Europe through which the Soviets had passed during this invasion had stayed under Soviet control in the immediate post war years, and that by 1950, many of them had communist governments which were installed by and supported by the Soviet Union. The general foundational understanding that pupils had of the USSR's role in World War II and the defeat of Nazi Germany, and the geography of the conflict in Europe, supported their ability to assimilate the more detailed information about which countries became communist and how this divided Europe between a capitalist West and a communist East. We were then able to drill down further, looking at specific events in 1948 and 49, like the Berlin blockade, the partition of Germany, and the creation of NATO. To sum up, I secured the knowledge that pupils had previously learned about World War II by checking their recall of key facts and dates about the conflict, reteaching as necessary, and then testing this. I also explicitly taught the key features of and differences between capitalism and communism, addressing some potential misconceptions. I then built on this foundational knowledge by clarifying and defining the term Red Scare, and then introduced new knowledge in reference to what pupils already knew about the Soviet role in World War II to show how they expanded in Eastern Europe.